Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to do a tips for getting a house or apartment in second year, because I know a lot of you guys are probably starting to take a look. I guess it kind of depends. I think if you are in Loughborough, you're definitely going to start to want looking, but if you're more in areas, you know, like in London or so, then you're probably not going to end up looking till much later, because I know that apartments go a lot quicker than they do here. But anyways, I just thought I'd give you guys a couple of tips so that, you know, if you wanted to have a little bit of insight based on someone who's, you know, now living in a house. So the first tip is to choose your flatmates. Obviously this is a pretty obvious one, but you have to make sure that, you know, the people that you're going to choose to live with are the people that you do indeed want to live with. And I'm not saying that on like just a surface level. Like, you have to think about a lot of stuff. Like, the first thing I would think about would be, you know, have you lived with them before? Did you live in halls with them? Do you know like their style in terms of like how they live and stuff like that? Are they more messy? Are they more clean? Are you more messy? Are you more clean? Are you gonna like enjoy or be fine with someone who's gonna be messy if, for instance, you're clean, or vice versa? Because those are little things to like keep in mind. Another thing is, do you guys always get along? Because obviously when you're living with someone, you're seeing them 24/7, so is it a relationship that's gonna work long term? And obviously, like, you have to keep into account that every single relationship is different, and I have friends of whom I absolutely adore, but I know would never work out if I were to live with them, just because of my way of living is completely different to theirs, and I just know because of that it wouldn't work out. But just keep in mind things like that, because those are really important for if you're gonna commit to living someone over a year. You want to make sure there's no drama, there's nothing that'll make you guys upset, you know? Next thing to consider would be whether like you're quiet or whether you're loud, and you're gonna be with other people who are either quiet or loud, because that's another thing to take into account. I would say I'm kind of a mixture of both. Like, I definitely enjoy being with other people and like spending time with others, but there's definitely a lot of time that I would need it to be like completely quiet, like in my room if I'm studying or if I'm trying to sleep and stuff like that. I need quiet, so stuff like that I take into account as well. Obviously you can also, you know, take into account the different room arrangements and stuff like that. So I'm next to the living room, which is probably not the best place for if you want to be quiet, like in a quieter area. But if you do want somewhere more quiet, I would avoid being on like the first floor, or like where the living room and the kitchen is, because that's where people are going to most likely be around whenever you have people over, or if people even in the house come down and stuff like that. And so just all of that to take into account about whether it's going to work with your flatmates or not is very important, because obviously you have to know them like at least a minimum to be able to get along, and if not, then at least be open to getting to know them and stuff like that. Obviously when you first meet the people you're going to be living with, there's also quite a bit of excitement surrounding that, and so sometimes it's a little bit harder to see these like little minute details, or sometimes you just learn to work with them. But yeah, if you do know these things in advance, I would definitely consider them before getting a house with someone, because that is, again, a 1-year commitment, or 2 possibly, because I know in London they do 2-year leases, so something to take into account. Next thing would be to start looking early, and when I say early, I mean early for the time frame that you're meant to be looking for. So if you're in Loughborough, I would definitely suggest looking maybe around now, like now to, we're like November, so November, December is like the best time to start looking, and the best time to not even just start looking, but to start deciding on which house you want to get, just because of the fact that, like, I think we got our place in like, we started looking like January, and that was actually really late in comparison to when everybody else was looking. We didn't think it was late, but they actually recommend you to look in January, but we had so many like less options. It was actually kind of crazy. Like, the options that we were given were definitely not the best. And so because of that, I recommend definitely going early. We definitely ended up finding a great place, but we didn't even get to visit it, and we just kind of stumbled on it without even, it's a bit complicated how we got this house, but in short, it's better to look early, because then you have, you know, the best choices, and obviously you get a lot of the cheaper choices available as well, especially if that's something that you're looking for. And that's why I'm on to the next point. I would say to have a price range, and when I say a price range, like, define that with the group before you guys even start looking. For our group, we all didn't really, how do I say, the prices didn't matter so much for us just because of the fact that we're all pretty well off. But I would say that like if you are someone who definitely needs to know the price range and like decide on that before you guys even start looking, that I would do that now and pitch that to the rest of the group early on, so that when you guys are looking, you guys can already get rid of all the options that are either too expensive or too cheap. I don't know if too cheap is a thing, but like if too expensive especially. I know in Loughborough you will get anything between, and they typically do this per week. I know in the UK it's probably per month that they'll tell you, but typically per week in Loughborough you can, for like the really cheaper options, you get around 80 a week. And then for the more expensive options you get around 120, maybe over that. But yeah, I think it also depends on how many people are in the house, how many, you know, rooms, stuff like that, because that definitely will, and how modern the house is, because if it's been like newly renewed and stuff like that, then it will tend to be more expensive. But yeah, that's definitely something to look out for. I'm personally paying 110 a week, which amounts to a little under £500 a month. And the reason I'm paying that, like normally for the house it's 115 a week, but I have a smaller room, so I'll be paying slightly less because of that. And on top of that, I also have the room that gives on the main road, so a lot less privacy, so that's definitely something to take account. So this is another thing, when you guys are looking at prices, keep into account, like, or take into account that you guys can separate the prices once you've started moving into the house. So something to look out for, like, is a room smaller, for instance? Is the lighting not as good in one room? You know, stuff like that is really important, because you could definitely get a cheaper room because of that. And yeah, I just think it's important to kind of establish, like, if the rooms are not all equal in size or like in location or lighting or visibility / privacy, there's no reason why you guys should all be paying the same price. Now that usually works out. We've decided to work it out like that. I know a lot of people do that usually, so that's something to take into account. But another thing to also take into account is to be aware of whether the prices include bills or not, because that's very important. I know Locate Me typically don't include bills, so you'll get a lot of the cheaper houses, but then you have to pay bills at the end of the month, and that can be an extra 20 to 30 pounds a month. So it really depends. For us, all our oh my god, I can't speak. All our bills are included, so we don't have to worry about that, and that is definitely like a relief off our shoulders. We also have our Wi-Fi paid for, or we have like a certain amount for Wi-Fi, and so like as long as it's within 40 pounds I think a month, then they pay for it. If it's over, obviously you pay the difference, but usually Wi-Fi shouldn't be that expensive or isn't that expensive, so if anything we're making a profit out of that. But yeah, definitely take into account whether, you know, they will include bills or not within your house or price, just because of the fact that, like, if they're not, then you have to be careful as well about how much you're using and spending in terms of energy and like water and stuff like that. So yeah, that would be my next tip. And also, like, if you guys have a budget, you know, just make sure as well to take in the location. I know that in Loughborough prices are a lot cheaper than they are in London. Yeah, you can get easily like £200 for a week based on what I've heard, so it's definitely a lot different in terms of budget, and because of that, you know, that's pretty important to take into account. Also, within where you're living, the price is also really important. So for instance, we're definitely more in town, but we're close to the Lidl, which is very convenient. Even though we're a little bit further from university, it's not like the best in that regard. Like, it's around like a 30-minute walk. Just keep into mind, like, if the actual like house is in a good location, then like it's worth paying maybe a little bit more, stuff like that. Especially, I know like in bigger cities there's definitely neighborhoods and stuff like that. In Loughborough it's a lot smaller, so we don't have as many problems like that. You know, something to take into account as well as safety. So just all these little things to take into account, I guess, definitely will make for the price range. But also, just it's really important to kind of just decide on that before you guys even decide to start looking, because if you start looking at like the £200 a week houses, for instance, and you know you can't pay that much, it's kind of useless to kind of get your hopes up looking at pretty houses, you know what I mean? But anyways, next one is to decide which company you want to go with. So we're with Top Let, but there's so many different ones in Loughborough. I know there's also Donkey Digs, which is pretty good. Humphreys, I mentioned Locate Me as well. And then there's also a different type of housing altogether where basically it's a little bit like halls, but it's not on campus, it's outside campus. It's more like you're renting a room and you can decide whether you want like an ensuite room, like a studio, stuff like that. So those are like Student Hive, Andrew Chell, Unite Students. I know Unite Students also operates in other places. So those are all options as well for if, for instance, you don't have a certain amount of people that you want to be living with, or, you know, you kind of have to last minute decide on a place, because at least you don't have to consider, you know, having to find other flatmates or stuff like that. So those could be good options for that. But I think all of them have their perks. We personally went with Toplets because I have the cat and they were okay with me having the cat, so that was a huge bonus. And I think it's just also because the bills were included. I think that was pretty important for us. We didn't want to be paying a lot outside of bills. But then again, for other companies, I know I have friends who are with Donkey Digs, and I think that they managed to get their bills included, or like they talked to the manager to be able to get their bills included and stuff like that. So it can be pretty flexible. I know with Toplets we definitely don't contact the owner directly. We just contact Toplets and they will deal with it. But I know with Donkey Digs, for instance, you can contact directly the owner. So it's just like different companies and different ways of working. So that's just something I want to take in mind. I would just suggest looking at anything you're really interested in and then deciding later on which company you feel is your best fit. Next stage, I would say, is actually viewing the houses. So when you view houses, it's like really important to have like criteria. I mentioned some of them for the price range, but then it's kind of different from when you're actually looking at the house, what you want to see within the house. So, you know, whether you're looking for like a modern house or older house, like it's really important that you guys have criteria before you even start looking, just because you guys have to get on the same page on what type of house and what type of rooms you guys want to have, so that once you're looking, there isn't so much conflict about, oh, I want this place or I want that place, because at that point you would have already decided on what type of house you want to have. So that would have been the first important thing. And so in terms of what to have within your criteria, for me, having a pretty like modern slash functional but like nice looking kitchen is important for me, just because of the fact that I do cook, and so I like having a nice kitchen. I just feel like it motivates me a lot more to cook, and I think that we got that, so I'm pretty happy with that, even though I didn't even see it before we got it. I thought that's important for me. Lighting is super important for me, so I was first a little bit scared that because of the way that my room was facing that I wouldn't get afternoon lighting, but it turns out my windows are just so big that I get so much lighting anyways, even if I don't get it in the afternoon. And usually I get light all the way until like 1 p.m. or so of like direct light, sunlight. That's what I mean when I say light. Obviously in the UK it gets dark pretty early, and so I know that I would just be depressed if I had no lighting whatsoever, so that was really important for me. The room above mine also gets a lot of light, and even rooms on the other side, they get a lot of direct sunlight in the afternoon, so yeah, definitely something to take into account. That was important for me. Next thing is like the proximity to university or to town. So for here, we didn't have much of a choice because we kind of had to decide last minute which place we were gonna get. Like there wasn't so much of, oh, we could choose a location, but if you're looking early, surely you can. And in Loughborough, you have something called the Student Triangle, and so that's like the prime area between town and university. So usually being within that triangle means that you're not that far from university or town, which is pretty good. So I would suggest looking within that student triangle. That would be like the best option. If you are like living in London or something, I would suggest, you know, either being within zone 1 or zone 2, just so that you're in proximity, because I'm guessing most universities are in zone 1 or zone 2, so that you would be at least in proximity of where you go to uni, or I guess where you work. Also, you have to take into account whether there's a parking spot or not. I know personally I drive, but I don't have a car, and I don't think any of our flatmates have a car either, but knowing that you have access to a parking spot for free is useful. We have Lidl right next door, so if they really need to park for a long time, they could just park at Lidl, so that's not so much of a problem. But for some people, if they do want to drive, if they drive a lot, having a parking spot is important, so make sure that you have access to that, or at least you can pay to have access to that. Next thing would be whether you have gyms nearby or trails, and that's important for if you're pretty sporty. For us, since we're close to town, there's quite a lot of gyms in town, which is quite, like, pretty useful. Honestly, town is like not even 10 minutes away, so being able to at least have that option is pretty useful. And on top of that, Loughborough is a pretty, I don't know, it's like, it's a town, but it definitely has like a lot of like fields and stuff like that, and there's also the canal that you can run along, so that's pretty useful. If not, you can just run around town if you feel confident enough for that. But yeah, honestly, these are all stuff that you need to take into account when choosing like the location and like what you really enjoy about your house. So yeah, that's pretty much all I could think of, but if you have any other questions, put them down in the comments below and I'll answer them. After that, you kind of just have to agree on the house and hopefully the process goes well. But yeah, if once you've done all that, you're pretty much good to go. So hopefully these were helpful tips. It was nice to have you guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave comments down below about suggestions you want for the next coming weeks, because now that we're in lockdown, I could definitely use for a bit of inspiration. But yeah, bye!